bow before the Lord. Let's pray. Lord, may the words on my lips, the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable unto you this day, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Young father was on his way home from work and getting close to his house, and just down the street from his house he saw that there was a young lad about his son's age that had a lemonade stand. And he couldn't pass by this young boy who was selling lemonade for 50 cents a cup. And so he stopped and he gave the boy 50 cents, and the boy went back and got a lemonade for him and passed it out to the car and passed it to him. And father was drinking his lemonade and enjoying his lemonade, and the boy was standing there and waiting and waiting, and he turned to the boy and he said, "Is there something else?" And the little boy said, "Yeah," he said, "I've got other customers waiting, and that's the only cup I have." It's tough to be in business when you only have one cup. It's maybe a good parable for the view that Jesus had of the religious elite, of the Pharisees and Sadducees, of the rabbis of the day, in relation to love. They were kind of one cup people. Oh, they taught about love all right, but the view that they had of love was a very narrow kind of an understanding of love. Very much a conditional love, a limited love. Love those who look like you, love those who act like you, love those that eat like you, love those that dress like you, and shun everybody else. That was the order of the day in the part of the world that Jesus lived in. Loved only those who are part of your inner circle. Don't associate with those that are outside of that circle. So Jesus comes along and he's got a different idea. He's got a different approach. He loved everybody that he met. He accepted and he included and he reached out to those who were hurting, to those who were poor, to those who were needy, to those who were in trouble, to those who were sick, to those who were part of the outcasts of the day. And he loved them all. And he had lots of cups of love. It was like he was saying, look, this is the way that I love you. Now love one another as I have loved you, and by this love, all will know that you are my disciples. It was so important, this idea of inclusiveness, of an inclusive kind of love, of loving everybody for Jesus. But the disciples just didn't seem to get it. Jesus called for a departure of that one-cut kind of love that they had been taught all of their lives. To love insiders and to avoid outsiders. That's why the disciples' initial response when women brought their children, when mothers brought their children to Jesus, that the disciples, we read, rebuked them until Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." He was saying, don't live like that. Use a multi-cup approach to life, a multi-cup approach to living. Reach out to all with respect, with love, and with that same kind of forgiveness that he forgave that woman, with kindness, with gentleness. Somebody wrote what I thought was a brilliant piece about what might have happened in that upper room when Jesus gave those orders to love one another. I've handed out some papers to those who would help me with this. And you're going to play the part of some of the disciples. And when Jesus said, "I give you a new commandment to love one another. Love everyone you meet as I have loved you. By this love, all will know that you are my disciples." Somebody with a clever kind of approach offered the sayings that some of the disciples might have given. Simon Peter, are you out there? Simon Peter said,
"Do we have to write this
we have to write this down? Andrew said,
Will this be on the next test?
James said, do we have a James? James said, does spelling count? Philip said,
do you have to know it's word for word?
you have to know it word for word. Matthew said,
when do we get out of here?
John said,
Does this apply to all of us?
and the disciple Thomas said, finally Judas said,
What does this have to do with real life?
what does this have to do with real life? And the little play concludes, and Jesus wept. Here's a message to love, but not just love. It's a Christ-like love, to love in a Christ-like way, to love graciously, to love generously, to love sacrificially, to love unconditionally. In our story from the 7th chapter of the book of Luke, a Pharisee has invited Jesus to dine with him as his guest, but strangely, he has not done the kind of ritual things that are expected in that day. So when you invited in that day, when you invited somebody to your house, the first thing that you did was you gave them a kiss. Kisses are very cultural. I was saying to Janice just last night, I was saying, do you know, I don't remember in the 5 years that we were in Papua New Guinea, any of the indigenous people kissing one another. She agreed. 5 years, we never saw a Papua New Guinean kiss a Papua New Guinean. Kissing is very cultural. Some cultures you go to, kissing all the time. Right? Anybody ever been to France? Where else? Anybody? Italy, maybe, perhaps? A whole lot of kissing going on? Sorry?
In Romania, where Simon Wesley came.
Romania? Okay. Mexico? Okay. That's the tourists, isn't it? Doing that? Very cultural thing, kissing. So when we say, oh, they kissed, I mean, if I told everybody to give one another the kiss of Christ as they were coming in, you'd be shocked. But that was commonplace in that day and expected. Second thing was washing people's feet. People were walking in their bare feet most of the time. They're walking where the animals have left their mark. So the culture of the day, the expectation of the day was to wash somebody's feet when they came in with cool water. Another thing that was cultural that we might think is kind of strange, putting oil in somebody's head or perfume on somebody's head. Another cultural expectation of the day, those three things when you invited somebody in. Strangely, this Pharisee in this house that Jesus had been to provided none of these things. Why didn't he do it? Well, maybe because he had a different reason for inviting Jesus to have dinner with him. Maybe he was trying to trap Jesus. Maybe he was going to give him a nice meal, maybe too much wine, maybe get Jesus to say something that he could use against him. Whatever the reason, the Pharisee that's inviting him doesn't do these three acts that are expected as a good host. In those days, wealthy people lived in kind of a courtyard that was open to the street. And often in that courtyard, around the house, the courtyard was open to the house. And often people would walk by and have an opportunity to engage in discussions around religious matters, or to at least hear wise people discussing some kind of cultural matters. So we have in this story that there's a woman that is in the crowd that's outside who has a bad reputation, a woman of the street. And we read that she's listening to this conversation, watching the conversation that goes on. And she notices the poor manners, perhaps, that are being offered or not offered by the host to their guest, Jesus. And so she herself enters into this courtyard. She begins to weep and in her tears washes Jesus' feet, and with her long hair starts to clean and dry his hair. And then she anoints him with an expensive oil. The Pharisee is really put off by this because he knows who this woman is and where she's from and what kind of class she's in. And so begins to reprimand Jesus for being associated and allowing this woman to do those kinds of things to him. But Jesus sees this woman in her beauty and in her tenderness and in her love. And he commends her, and he includes her, and he forgives her. Such is the way that a lot of people related to Jesus, especially those people who are outsiders. They were drawn to Jesus. What was it that ordinary people like you and me, were drawn to Jesus about? What did people resonate with Jesus about? Why were so many people trying to even just get a glimpse of him? And why were the lepers and the blind out to seek him? Why were outcasts like this women feeling like they wanted to touch him, to be with him, to be around him? Well, outcasts were drawn to Jesus because Jesus for them was a bearer of good news. Many were starving for good news. For many, their religion was cold, it was authoritarian, it was even exploitative, and it was abusive, even to the point of being abusive. Their relationship with their religious leaders didn't bring them joy, it didn't bring them the healing of their hurts and of their suffering and of their pain, and it didn't bring meaning into their lives. So they were drawn to this Jesus who was bringing meaning into their lives over their relationship with God. With this Jesus who told them, you matter, you're important, you are a somebody. Sorry, got my pages mixed up here. One of the thoughts that I had, again, when we were going to Papua New Guinea, was that when we arrived in Papua New Guinea, our social life would drop from being up here, living in Ottawa, to down here in this very small city. Just the opposite was true. We got invited out for dinner all the time from other expatriates. There was one large enclosed swimming pool that was in the center of town. We got invited to that all kinds of times. We got invited to a lot of Australians there, and we got invited to Aussie Barbies and to the Australian mess, to traditional dances called sing-sings. And then one of the things that we had to get used to was, and some of you living in small towns, that grew up in small towns will resonate with this, when you went out shopping for a loaf of bread or for a dozen eggs, it could take a long, long time to do that. Some of you understand how that works? I'm seeing some hands go up. So it's 5% of your time is shopping and 95% for socializing. Well, life in the city, in the big city, could be just the opposite of that. There can be a lot of stuff going on. But the downside is if you're not part of a social group, if you're not part of a church, if you don't have the financial resources to take advantage of all that Kelowna has to offer, it can be a lonely and difficult place to live. The good news that is, even for people that find that they are ignored, that they're lonely, that they're isolated, that we have a God who wants to be in relationship with us. There is no pit so deep, said Corrie ten Boom, that great Dutch theologian. There is no pit so deep that God isn't deeper still. I like that. There is no pit so deep that God isn't deeper still. That's why the outcasts were drawn to Jesus, because he brought them good news of salvation, of love, and of acceptance. Secondly, outcasts were drawn because Jesus practiced what he preached. He preached one thing, he lived that same thing. He was keen to expose hypocrisy. People were fed up with that kind of hypocrisy that they felt among the religious elite. And Jesus wasn't one he was the real McCoy. Again, Papua New Guinea. One of our next door neighbors, an Australian expatriate that had married a local person, and they had one beautiful young boy from that relationship. And this father, one Sunday, preached a message on love that was the best message on love that I had ever heard. Except we knew, by him being our next door neighbor, of how poorly he treated his wife, and how poorly he treated his son, and how he failed in offering that unconditional love that is so important for a child to receive. And we witnessed that as next door neighbors. So as we heard this wonderful sermon, we recognized that he wasn't preaching, he wasn't practicing what he was preaching, and there was a lie about that. People don't want to hear people preaching about something that they're not practicing, and that's what they got with Jesus. He was the real McCoy. Preached and he practiced. He was a living example of that which he preached. Lastly, outcasts loved Jesus because for Jesus, they weren't outcasts. Each person he viewed as a unique child of God, loved by God. To Jesus, each person was a valued treasure. That's why the ordinary, the sick, and the lowly, and the outcast resonated with Jesus. Because to him, they were not lowly and sick and outcast. He valued them, he accepted them, and he loved them, even though they were lowly and sick and outcasts. And he wants us to do the same. Let me close with this story about a story from a long, long time back. You might have heard this story before. It's about a woman who sees a child who is on winter's day standing outside a bakery on the grate by the sidewalk where the hot air is coming in. And she comes up to the child. She asks the child why the child is barefoot and why he doesn't have a coat on. He's just got a little t-shirt on and some tattered jeans. And he says that he doesn't have a coat, he doesn't have shoes. And so the woman says, well, come on. She takes him to the department store, she buys some shoes for him, she buys a coat for him. And the little boy is blown away by this. He says to her a surprising question. He says to her, he says, lady, are you God's wife? And the woman answered, she says, no, but I'm one of his children. And the little boy says, I knew it. I knew it. I knew you were related to him. And I like that story because I hope that that's what people can say about us. That we're related to God. That we are God's children by the way that we live. Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. And by this love, all people will know that you are my disciples. Amen. Amen. Let's pray. Lord, you hold a high state. It is difficult to attain that kind of love of everybody that you hold. And yet you know that you want us to work towards that. So as we stumble towards living out that kind of love, a love for everybody, an inclusive love, we just ask that you would be with us and that you would guide us. We give you thanks for Jesus as an example of one who we can try to emulate. You know, there are people in our lives that are hard to love, but with you, and with you as our guide and our mentor, we know that we can do a better job of that. So, Lord, just help us, especially this week as we go about the tasks of this week. Might we hold that in mind, and we might hold that as our goal, to love all of those that we meet, and to see Christ's face in all of those that we meet, and to those that we meet to see Christ's face in us. Lord, we are troubled and we are anxious about those who are part of our congregation who are in hospital or who have some illness. There seem to be a great number of them. The risk of leaving some out, we pray for Jim Hunter. We pray for Jake. We give thanks for Charlene being back with us, and know that there's some issues that continue there. Lord, for all of those members of our congregation who are struggling,
particularly with health. We hold them up to you and ask your blessing on them in the name of the one who taught us to pray together, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory,